So, good morning, Avodah. Bruchim Abayim to all dear friends. We're starting Masechet Avodah Zara Be'ezrat Hashem Yitbarach. Masechet Avodah Zara really comes after Masechet Sanhedrin, even though that you have Makot and Shvuot in between. The Tosafot say really twice they don't say it exactly like this, but they're twice in Masechet Sanhedrin, Daf Samech, Daf Kuf Yud Bet, that we speak about the halachot of Avodah Zara, and hence the mind of the Gemara is set to follow Masechet Sanhedrin with Masechet Avodah Zara, but we have stops on the way to discuss what the Sanhedrin actually does with chiyuv of makot for some people, for chiyuv of shvuot for some people, and now we start Masechet Avodah Zara, one of the most invigorating Masechtot that speak about many relevant topics when speaking about Israel, the Umot HaOlam. When we are in Galut, we deal with Yain Nesech, we have the Sugya of Pat Akum, Bishul Akum, Shemen, and many other things of doing business regularly with the Goyim, Yom Edehen, and many other relevant halachot that we deal with on daily basis are all tucked away beautifully in the dapim, the pages of Masechet Avodah Zara. So it's a fascinating limud to have merged with many beautiful agatas that we're going to have. Really one of the Masechtot that right from the get-go, at the bottom of this Amud, either today or tomorrow, we'll get to one of the most fascinating, all-time famous agatas of Shas, of when HaKadosh Baruch Hu starts to judge the Umot HaOlam and the world at the end of days, what exactly is going to happen, the discussion between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Umot HaOlam, which is a fascinating talk to have. Now, the Meiri writes, it's very important to note that we have these halachot of staying away from Umot HaOlam because of one of two reasons. A, because we don't want to be dragged and drawn after the minhagim, after the deeds of the goyim, like the Rambam writes in Sefer Mada, in Ilchot Deot, in Perek Vav, Halacha Aleph, says, Derech beriyato shel Adam, liot nimshach, בדעותיו ובדרכיו אחרי רעיו וחבריו ונוהג כאנשי מדינתו. A person, we are wired like this. We are created in such a way that we are dragged and drawn after our svivot, after our circles of friends in society. And therefore Rambam says a person has to choose the people who he hangs out with and surrounds himself with very carefully. And of course, like the pasuk says, "Vayit'arevu begoyim vayilmedu mima'asehem." That when we get mixed and mingling with the goyim, we learn from their actions. Hence, the importance of putting gidarim, boundaries, that we should not learn from the goyim. And this is actually a warning that you see not just the Rabbanan. The Maral of Prague explains in his work on explaining the Mitzvot Rabbanan, in the very beginning, the first perek, he explains that even when you have a Mitzvah Rabbanan, Chazal learned it from the Torah. For instance, his example is something that we're going to learn in Daf Lamed Hey, in the Mishnah, in Masechet Avodah Zara, in our Masechta. And he says, when Chazal wanted to make sure we don't intermingle and intermarry with the Goyim, it says, so how do you ensure that there's not intermarriage? It says, take a look at the Chumash. When Moshe Rabbeinu wanted us to go through the Goyim but not get mixed with them, what did he say? He said, we're going to just get water and raw material from you. We're not going to get cooked goods. So it says, you see, if they cook it, bishulei akum is something that brings us close. So hence the mitzvah rabbanan of not using something that's cooked by a goy bishul akum, right? And so on and so forth. We have in even the concept of not mingling with the goyim, you have it really in the Chumash itself. It says, "Vayit'aravu b'goyim vayilmedu mimasehem." Hashem says, when you go to Eretz Canaan, even though that's Eretz Israel, be very careful not to learn from the ways that they did, even their service to their deities. I don't want you to implicate those systems and those actions and practices towards me even, Hashem says. Because once you start picking up things from the Goyim, you will go in their pathways, and that's dangerous. That's the first thing the Meiri says. And the second one is, we don't want to promote the actions of Avodah Zarah. As we will see, there are halachot already in the very first Mishnah pertaining to us not letting a goy do something that's asur for him even. Now, what is considered Avodah Zarah for us? What is considered Avodah Zarah for a goy? If Christianity is considered Avodah Zarah, is Islam considered Avodah Zarah? All of those juicy, amazing questions we're going to be dealing with, even though the Gemara is not going to go through them in a very detailed way. We're going to be discussing all of that based on the Tosafot, Rambam, Rivash, many other Rishonim, Bezrat Hashem, as the Sugya develops. Again, there's many more pieces of Hakdama, preface we could be discussing here. But again, without further ado, we're going to start the first Mishnah of the Masechet, which discusses doing business and interactions that we have with the Goyim right prior to their Yom Edam, right? Yom Edam, Rambam writes, the reason that we call it Edam, Yom Edam, which the Gemara is going to discuss, is it with an Ayin, is it with an Aleph, is because we don't want to call it Moed, we don't want to call it a holiday, because Rambam writes in Pirush Mishnayot Rambam wrote when he was very young. And then afterwards, actually, he retracted certain parts, and he actually gives an excuse for why he retracted many of the chidushim that he wrote. But Lemase, Pirush Mishnayot of the Rambam is the backbone to many other Rishonim's Pirush and the Gemara. He writes, it's asur to call it Moed because it's Avodah Zarah. What Moed? What Moed? Holidays. Holidays is asur, Rambam writes. But nevertheless, the so-called holidays of the Goyim, it will be asur to do certain interactions with them, which is the topic of our Mishnah. So let's begin. B'siyata dishmaya. Says the Mishnah, Lifnei edehen shel ovdei kochavim, before their so-called holidays, shelosha yamim, 3 days before, which the Gemara later on is going to go back and forth in Daf Vav. Is it 3 days, including the Yom Ed, the so-called holiday that they have, or is it 3 days aside from the day of the holiday? And the Maskana of the Gemara, 5 pages later, is going to be that it is without, meaning 3 days before the start of the 3 full days before the holiday will be Asur Laset ve'latet imahem. Laset ve'latet we translate, normally speaking, as doing business, which means laset means to buy, latet would mean to sell. Now, why would it be asur to buy something from a goy? Why would it be asur? Okay, I can understand. When you sell, the buyer is very happy. Oh, I got this, amazing, and he's going to be excited. And when it's within 3 days of his holiday, he's going to go and thank his deity. People used to be very frum. Nowadays, it's all watered down. It's like, yashka shmashka. Like, it's not really, no Avodah Zarah is going to go thank his. But back in the day, something good happened in your life, everything was attributed to their Avodah Zarah, to their deity, and therefore, we don't want him to go thank his Avodah Zarah. Why don't we want him to thank his Avodah Zarah? A, because the Pasuk says, V'shem Elohim acherim lo tazkiru. Do not mention the names of deities of Avodah Zarah, but doesn't end there the Pasuk. Lo yishama al picha. Should not be heard on your lips. So which we darshan from that, Lo yishama al picha means you should not cause it to be said. So if I do business with a goy that I know is going to go thank his avodah zarah, I am causing lo yishama al picha, that he's going to go mention the name, or maybe in the business we're going to get into a dispute, and then he's going to say, I swear to, right, for his business, and he's going to swear to avodah zarah lo yishama al picha, right? Or it's simply put, lifnei aiver lo titen michshol, that you are causing a person to do avodah zarah by doing business with them and causing them to go thank their deity, right? So either of those two reasons. But Rashi over here says in Daf Bet that not only selling to them is a problem, but buying from them also is a problem, because buying from them also, the guy sells it, says, I got this off my list, I finally sold this thing, right? And he's going to be happy, he's going to go thank. Later on, in Daf Vav, Rashi is just going to say, Laset velatet means to sell something to them and to get money instead of it, right? Which means only sales are asur. The Tosafot holds that Rashi was choser. Rashi was retracted his psak from Daf Bet. Be that as it may, either or is fine, and Tosafot's understanding is when you're selling to them, you're selling to them things that could be used for avodah zarah. In other words, Tosafot is much more lenient in the understanding of the Mishnah, the Gemara, and he understands if you're selling an animal to them, that's a problem. Because you know what he's going to do if a goy comes to you within 3 days before their so-called chag, and he's wanting an animal or a chicken, what do you think they're going to do with it? They're going to bring it as a korban to their avodah zarah. So what's your business selling to them something that's going to be used as a korban for avodah zarah? That's the understanding of the Tosafot. Again, we just started the first line in the Mishnah. I want to overwhelm you with information, but these are the platforms that we're going to be dealing with in the next few dapim. So that's laset velatet, to do business with them, either selling, buying, Rashi here, Rashi Dafav, or Tosafot, that means selling animals, items used for avodah zarah. But that's not where it ends. Lehashilan velishol mehen, to lend them things, of course, because if the guy wants this very specific item to borrow, and he finds somebody to lend it to him, he's going to be so excited that finally I got this thing that I wanted. He's going to go thank his avodah zarah, hazaku baruch, you gave it to me. But what's the problem with borrowing from them? What's the problem with borrowing from them? What? They're happy what? Because they're happy, right, the Rishon, because the guy says, the Jew needs me. Look at the time that we have come to, the Jew needs me. Oh, thank you. That we've gotten to a situation that even the Jews need me, right? So that's why lish'ol mehen is a problem. Says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, lehalvotan velilvot mehem, to lend them money and to borrow money from them. Now, let me explain something. Throughout Shas, the language, people think, because in English, there aren't two different verbs for this. In Hebrew, there are. In English, when I borrow money from you, the verb is borrowing. When I borrow your coffee mug or your hammer, it's also borrowing. In Lashon HaKodesh, in Hebrew, is not like that. If it's something that I'm taking to use and I'm returning it itself, that is she'elah. I'm borrowing, I'm giving it back. When I am borrowing something that I'm not going to return it, but equivalent of it, like money you take to spend, right? Lehotzah nitna. You're not going to return the same money, you're going to return a different money. Right? Or people say, can I borrow your challah? Can I borrow a challah from you? What do they mean? They don't mean that they're going to give the same challah back. They're going to eat the same challah. They're going to give you a different challah instead. So that is lehalvot. This actually makes a huge difference when you learn the fifth parak of Baba Mitziyah, the halachot of ribit, that's for halva'ah, which again is very different than she'ela. So says the Gemara, to pay them back the debt that you have to them, and to make them pay the debt that they have to you. Why is that a problem? Well, I understand why paying them the debt you have to them is a problem, because the guy now has money, he's happy. But to make them pay, you would say, well, the guy is going to be sitting and crying that he had to pay. But the Gemara is going to say, yes, initially he's going to be upset. But afterwards, right, immediately after he gets over the shock of having to pay, he says, oh, Baruch Hashem, it's over. You know, I checked it off my list, and that's a level of happiness as well, the Baruch Hashem, or Baruch, whatever it is that they have. I don't have any more debts to have. So says the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Nifra'in mehen, mipereh shemetzer hulo. We can collect debt from them because the guy is going to be very upset. He's not going to be happy. Amru lo chachamim, argue with Rabbi Yehuda and say no. Afal pi shemeseru achshav, even though that now he is upset, now he's sitting and crying, but lemachar, which doesn't mean lachar zman, which doesn't mean necessarily a long time from now, but if it's within 3 days, he's gonna have enough time to get over it and then be happy that this is checked off his list, and that is something for him to thank his Avodah Zarah, Baruch Hashem, I don't have thanks his Avodah Zarah that he doesn't have a debt to pay anymore, and he's good to go. So that's the Mishnah. Says the Gemara,
how much of this actually applies during the whole year? Why does it have to be specifically Be'edehin?
You will actually see in the Gemara that this is very relevant. The Gemara is going to speak about Sundays, which used to be the day of Avodah Zarah for Romans. Even back then, the Gemara says, is going to say, well, if you say 3 days before, then what have you got? You have Sunday, 3 days before and 3 days after because the Gemara is going to discuss after the Chag. Then the whole week you can't do business with them. So you see that Yom Rishon, which is Sunday, literally Sunday, is going to become a question of this sort, which really has to be discussed nowadays, that you have Sunday as a Yom Edam, whether or not that's going to be a problem or not. We're going to discuss all of that, Bezrat Hashem, versus Kratzmacht and the end of December, and so on and so forth. So it says, the Gemara, Rav Shmuel, Chatani Edehen, Chatani Edehen. Rav Shmuel, one of them learned in the Mishnah, in the language of the Mishnah, Edehen with Aleph, which is Karov Yom Edam. It comes from the language of destruction and breakage, which again is a very sharp language to replace with Yom Eid, which wouldn't be holiday. Again, this is one of the advantages of knowing Farsi, because Eid, like Eid and Nowruz, it's the same language that they have had for over 2,500 years. Is the same thing. Well, the way we have it is with an ayin. In Farsi, it's written with an ayin, just like you have aleph and ayin in Hebrew. You have aleph and ayin in the Arabic language as well, which is the shared source of language with Farsi and many other regional languages in that area of the Middle East. But nevertheless, Syria, all the Turkish, all of those people use basically the same basic language. Says the Gemara, Rav Shmuel had this machloket. It's actually very interesting to note that the Maratz Chiyut, one of the very interesting mefarshim within the list of Achronim, he says, you see from this Gemara that the Mishnah was not written in the time of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Interesting, he says, because that's how they knew it by heart, they said it by heart, Baal Peh, but it's not that they had it written on a piece of paper, because how is it shayach to have a machloket if it's with an aleph or an ayin? If it's written, just take a look at what Rabbi wrote, and then you'll have it. That's how Maratz Chiyut says. it says Rebbe instituted, even though that the Gemara says that Rebbe had this drasha of Et la'asot la'Hashem eferu toratecha, as the Tehillim says, that when it's time for Hashem, sometimes you have to bend the rules, and that's what the Rebbe darshaned, to make it mutar to write Torah Sheba'al Peh, because Torah Sheba'al Peh usually is asur to write. But Rebbe darshaned that's time people are going to forget the Torah Sheba'al Peh, therefore let's write it. So says the Maratz Chiyud, that's only a heter that Rebbe gave, and he was mesader the Mishnayot, he organized the Mishnayot the way they should be, but not that it was published already in a written format in the time of Rebbe, until later on it was not. Others disagree with Maratz Chiyud very strong. They say, no, Rebbe actually wrote the Mishnayot, so how is it that you have a Machloket Rav and Shmuel, if it's with the Aleph, with an Ayin? It's because they were written as you copy different things in different ways. So one of them had a Girsa with an Ayin, one of them had a Girsa with an Aleph. Now, as you'll see, the Gemara says both of them are correct. It's unlike other machlokets in Shas that each one holds the other one is incorrect. Here, each one holds the other one also is correct. So it's not such a big machloket. It's a question of preference. Which one of them is better language in the Mishnah to use? Again, you are making letzanut of Avodah Zarah. You're making a sharp language to defile, so to speak, the Avodah Zarah of the Goyim. Which language is more important? And we will see in the Gemara that one of them is the cause, one of them is the effect. How so? Says the Gemara. So Rabbi Shmuel, one of them says Edehen, and the other one says Edehen with an Ayin. Man detani Edehen lo mishtabesh, man detani Edehen lo mishtabesh. Both of them are correct, says the Gemara. First wide line. Both of them are correct. Man detani Edehen, the one that learns it with an Aleph, is not incorrect. Lo mishtabesh. Dichtiv, because the pasuk says in Devarim, Li nakam v'shilem, when Hashem speaks about taking revenge of the Avodah Zarah and of the Avodah Zarah, le'et tamut raglam ki karov yom edam v'tash atidot lamo. It says because ki karov yom edam, the day of their breakage is close. So ed with an aleph means the day that they're going to break and get destroyed. Fine. So therefore, you use a language of the day of so-called holiday with Yom Edam. Even though that again, in the Farsi language, in the prevalent language of the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, Ed would be quote-unquote holiday, they said it with an aleph to use this shoresh, which means breakage. To use a negative language for Avodah Zarah. By the way, the Gemara says that letzanut, mockery, is a very negative thing. It's not a good thing. Actually, one of the four groups of people who don't see Penei Shechina La'atid Lavo is a person that always letzan, is always making jokes out of things, mocks everything, doesn't take anything seriously. Like it's a Rashi Tevot of Chashmal. Four groups. Chashmal is Chanafim, flatterers, Shakranim, the liars, Mesapre Lashon Hara, people who slander and say Lashon Hara, and Lamed is Letzanim. The Gemara says, Kol Letzanut Asura, all the Letzanut Asura, Chutz mi letzanut da Avodah Zarah. Aside from making fun, mockery of Avodah Zarah, because Avodah Zarah, in order for you not to be affected by it, you make a little fun of it in order to completely separate yourself from it and not to be affected by it. So that's one part of it. Ki karov yom edam, uman detani edehen, and the one that learns it with ayin, Lo mishtabesh also is not incorrect. Dichtiv, as it says, Yitenu edehen v'yistaku. Also is talking about Avodah Zarah there, the pasuk in Yeshaya Navi that says, Kol ha-goyim nikbesu yachtav, all the goyim will get together. V'yasfu leumim, and the nations will be gathered. Mi ba'em yagid zot, who is there to say this? Which the Gemara is going to discuss now, what it means. V'rishonot yashmiu yitenu edehen v'yistaku v'yishmeu v'yomru emet. So yitenu edehen, that means they're going to give their testimony. So says the Gemara, wait a second. Why is each one of them not agreeing to the other one. In other words, we said that both of them are correct. So why is it that one of them has a preference with an aleph and the other one has a preference with an ayin? Now, before we say that, the Gemara is going to come back to this pasuk in Yeshaya that we just had, and the Gemara is going to reject it and give a different pasuk with edehen for a good reason. We're going to see that in just a moment. But says the Gemara first, Uman de Tani edehen, the one that says it with an aleph, my tama lo tani edehen with an ayin. Why does he not prefer the one with ayin? In other words, if you could say with aleph and you could say with ayin, why the preference? If you have Rav and Shmuel, why does Rav not agree with Shmuel? And why does Shmuel not agree with Rav? In other words, you're telling me both of them are not incorrect. Both of them are correct. So if both of them are correct, just pick one. Why don't you agree with each other? Right? Why do you have a preference like that? Says the Gemara, it's very simple. The one that says with an aleph, he doesn't want to say with an ayin, Amar lecha tavra adif, because it says breakage, the language of destruction, is more preferable. Because you want to use a language that you think this is holiday, this is destruction. This leads to complete annihilation and destruction. So that language of strong verbiage of destruction is very important. So that's why he prefers that. And the one that holds with an ayin, why does he not say with an aleph? Also very simple. Amar lecha, he says to you, man kakarim lehu tavra, what's the reason of the breakage? What is the shoresh, the root of this destruction that you're talking about? Edut sheidu batzman. It's a testimony that the goyim are going to testify against themselves. So one of them, in other words, in simple language, one of them goes after the reason, the root, the other one goes after the outcome. That's the machloket. One says the outcome, you want it, what do you want to know? At the end of the day, you want to know that this is going to be destruction. So that's why I say it with aleph, which means breakage, which means destruction, right? The other one says, no, we have to go after the root, after the cause. The cause of it is an adut, a testimony against the goyim. Now, the Gemara says, really? Hilkach edut adifa. Therefore, the testimony is more preferable. But then the Gemara says, okay, but what testimony are you talking about? The pasuk in Yeshaya is not talking about the goyim; it's talking about the Jews. And it's not a negative thing; it's actually a positive thing. Says the Gemara, "V'hayitenu edehem." This that they will give their testimony, ve'istaku, and they will become tzaddikim. Be'ovdei kochavim ketiv. That talks about Ovdei Avodah Zara. That talks about the goyim. No, it doesn't. Ha be'Yisrael ketiv. It's talking about the Jews. The Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, because Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi already taught us about this pasuk in Yeshaya Navi, Perek Mem Gimel pasuk Tet. Says the Gemara, Kol mitzvot she Yisrael osin. Any mitzvah that you do, any mitzvah that Jews do, ba'olam hazeh, in this world, ba'ot umeidot lahem le'olam haba. The mitzvah itself comes and testifies in Bedin Shel Mala. This Jew, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, did me. I am created from the Maaseh mitzvah, from the action of mitzvah that this fellow did. So they themselves are the testimony for the good of the Jews. Exactly this pasuk in Yeshaya, says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Elu Israel. They will bring their testimonials. They will bring their witnesses. Who are the witnesses? The mitzvot themselves. The end of the pasuk that says they will hear and they will say it's emet. That's the goyim. Elu of the kochavim. That is talking about the goyim. That they will watch this process of the Jews being testified for, and they say, emet. It's true. They have to go to Gan Eden, and we got to go to the very invitation to the very hot place. That's how it's going to be. They themselves are going to say emet. The din of Hashem is true. So therefore, that pasuk is not edut against the goyim. That pasuk is not edut testimonial against the Ovdei Avodah Zarah. So therefore that pasuk should not be the pasuk that you use. Says the Gemara, Ela Amar Rav Huna Beret Rav Yehoshua. He says a different pasuk. Manda Amar Edehen, the one that says Edehen with an ayin, Mehacha, is from a different pasuk in Yeshaya Navi, this time from Perek Mem Dalet pasuk Tet, instead of Mem Gimel pasuk Tet. Next Perek. It says, Yotzere Pesel Kulam Tohu. The creators of idols, they're all bogus and emptiness. Vechamudehem Bal Yo'ilu, and what they desire will not be beneficial. Ve'edehem Hema, and they themselves are the testimony and the witness. That means the Avodah Zarah itself, the Pesel, is going to come in Betin Shalmala and testify against them that they did Avodah Zarah and they wasted their life. So that's the pasuk of Edehen. The cause of the destruction of the Goyim is the testimony that Avodah Zarah is going to give against the Ovdei Avodah Zarah. Darash Rab Chanina Bar Papa. Veitamar Rab Simlai. This is now the segue to one of the most amazing agatas in Masechet and in Shas. Says the Gemara, Rav Chanina Bar Papa, and there are those who say it was Rabbi Simlai Darshin. La'atid lavo mevi HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sefer Torah. La'atid lavo, in the time of the final judgment, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brings a Sefer Torah. Umanicho becheko, he holds it in his arms. Ve'omer, and Hashem says, Mi sha'asak bah yavo veitor scharo. Whoever has learned this has come to Amud Yomi and Night Seder. Come and get their schar. And if you haven't, sorry, there's no olam haba to be had. In other words, this is amazing thing. The Gemara is saying someone that learned Torah. How about other mitzvot? Well, the Torah is the main thing. You see this also in the Gemara in many other places. You see it in Sotah Daf Chaf Aleph. You see it in Masechet Ketuvot Daf Kuf Yud Aleph. The Gemara there says Techiyat HaMetim only comes from learning Torah. Right? The Gemara in Sotah says, well, Olam Haba comes from Torah. Therefore the Gemara says, well, Nashim b'may Kazachyan. What's chud do Nashim have to go to Olam Haba? They don't have the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And the Gemara says, well, actually they do, because they encourage their husbands to go to Amud Yomi early in the morning, to Night Seder at night, and they wait for their husbands to come late at night from the Bet Midrash, and they encourage their sons to go learn. That's their participation in the Olam Haba that they get. Actually, the last Mishnah in Shas, in Uktzin, it ends with, La'atid lava HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to give to every tzaddik or tzaddik Shai Olamot. Right? And one of the Mefarshim there says, why Shai Olamot? Why 310 Olamot? It's because there's 620 mitzvot, 613 plus 7 darabanans, and it's half and half with you and your wife. Right? Because they support you, they have the zchut of the Torah as well. So, be that as it may, the zchut in future is going to be Hashem holding a Torah in his arms and say, whoever learns this, come and get your schar. You didn't, sorry. So what happens is amazing. What happens next is, says the Gemara, Miyad mitkabesinu ba'in ovdei kochavim. Immediately all the goyim come. This is, by the way, a segue into this agata because of the first pasuk in Yeshaya that we brought from Perek Mem Gimel pasuk Tet, because the pasuk there says, Kol goyim nikbesu yachtav. All the goyim are going to gather. All the nations are going to get together. Mi bahem yagitzot. Who is going to be amongst them that's going to say this? What's Zot? Zot HaTorah, Asher Sam Moshe Lifnei Israel. Who could have Zot, which is Torah, right? So it says the Gemara, all the Ovdei Kochavim are going to come running, Be'ir Bubiyah, in a mixture, in a mingling, in a balagan. Shenemar, this pasuk is Yeshaya. Kol HaGoyim nikbesu yachtav, as the Yeshaya Navi says, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem says to them, Al tikansu lefanai be'ir Bubiyah. Have a little derech eretz. You can't come in a mixture like this, in a mingling like this, in a balagan like this. Every nation is going to come and enter separately, and what happens with them is something amazing that Be'ezrat Hashem will continue in the days to come.
Beautiful, beautiful.